Let's see it.
Yo, buddy. Still alive?
Check the internet lately. I'm a god. How can you kill a god?
Alignment lock.
Welcome to Alignment Lock, the only podcast who take random dialogue from characters as serious philosophy. From Metal Gear to Ace Combat, Morrowind to Spec Ops, my guests and I will discuss political views, parallels, and ideas from games in hopes of understanding them. I'm your host, Jacob, and I'll be your guide. I'm joined by game player and my mate, Reese Turner.
Hi, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing great. Yourself?
I'm ready to talk some game politics. You know, I think I don't get to talk about this enough.
Game politics is more important than actual politics.
Of course.
Well, first, I should mention that today's topic is the factions of Fallout New Vegas. What are your experience with those factions?
Well, I've played New Vegas so many times. I think back on the 360, and I normally always just go NCR.
Just NCR?
Normally, if I'm going typical, this is going to be controversial, but typical good guy playthrough, which I know some people might disagree as to whether or not they're good, but typically, yeah, I normally go with the NCR.
True blue American, then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Understandable.
Yeah. But I'm not sure. I've done Yes Man and Mr. House a few times just to see what they're like.
Never done a Legion run?
Once for the achievements, and I felt like a hollow failure afterwards. It was brutal.
Yeah.
Hegelian dialectics.
Well, we'll start by talking about the NCR, since we are both so fond of them. I'm not. But the NCR is known for a lot of things, and one of them is the fact that they are basically representing the old world. They're representing old America, and all of the problems that comes with old America.
Yeah.
So they started in Fallout 2. Love Fallout 2.
Yeah.
And, you know, they got that parallel to the real-life United States. There's a lot of lore in Fallout 2 about that. And in Fallout New Vegas, we see them, like, 40 years on. And they've developed a bit. They've grown a lot. And with all the flaws that comes from that, like, being very, very expanded.
Yeah.
They are overextended. They are deeply corrupt. They've got very big indecision in the Senate, mostly ruled by the Brahmin barons, who are basically the oil tycoons of the Fallout world, which is not so good. And you got to wonder, what are the positives?
Well, it's definitely they seem to definitely make it in a way that, you know, it gets you wondering, well, if the old government ended up in a nuclear war, then what's the point of trying to make it exactly like the old one?
Exactly.
But in terms of your options, I think definitely in terms of the Legion, there's absolutely no moral question there, I think. Mr. House, it gets a bit kind of grayer because you can somewhat argue what he wants is better for Vegas, but at the end of the day, the only system we as people really know is the kind of corrupt government system that we've all grown up in, really.
You do get that democracy, you know. And of
yeah.
course, living as a citizen in the NCR isn't bad. You get rights to an education, to being represented in court. You get rights that in America at the time weren't even that common. Like people of all types of sexualities can just live freely in the NCR,
Yeah.
which gets mentioned by NCR soldiers, no less. So it's very liberal, which is really good. I mean, it makes sense. It's California, so you know.
No, yeah, they do tend to strong arm occasionally, though.
That's their big problem. If you have
Yeah.
something they want, they'll take it.
Exactly, which in a post-apocalypse world, you know, it makes sense. But when they claim to have such lofty ideals of kind of, you know, freedom and democracy and all that, then, you know, if they see something they want, they still pretty much just take it.
It's just like America now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's the whole point of it, really. You know, is to kind of argue whether or not that system's for the best or not.
Of course. Well, what about the Legion? We got the authoritarian, hegemonic, imperialistic. That's what Kaiser says. Kaiser, not Caesar. He wants to be the Latin name. and he wants to make a new society modeled on Imperial Rome. He'd done this with tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Does this work with other people that are already more civilized compared to tribals?
I mean, in terms of tribals, I think it tends to work a bit better just because, the ideas of ancient Rome are so kind of long ago and, quite simple in a way. But the idea of just conquering every tribe you come across, it's it's something that'll bite you in the ass eventually, I think.
Definitely.
It's something that's not really sustainable, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, that one of the endings in the game is if you kill Caesar, a bunch of Legion soldiers start to realize, oh no, we were actually following the man and not the ideals of the Legion.
There's the big kind of power vacuum there.
Which will likely happen when he dies anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Regardless of.
Because the only ending ending where he actually gets rid of the brain tumor in his head is if you go down a Legion playthrough.
Mm-hmm.
So likelihood is they'll form into civil wars just like Rome did.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have that historical, since they're following, it's the same kind of thing with the NCR and the American government. They're following. The principles of Rome so very closely, and they're still not looking. It's the same thing. That civilization ended as well.
Yeah, they're both following old.
Yeah, they're both following kind of dead ideologies at that point.
Yeah, which Ulysses mentions in Lonesome Road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he's just kind of got a problem with everything.
He does, to be honest. There is, of course, another thing Caesar mentions, which is one of his driving reasons for conquering the NCR, which is Hegelian dialectics. Which is a very interesting ideology for him to be mentioning, because it's a Marxist ideology, which you'd think, why would a fascistic authoritarian dude be all about Marxism?
Yeah.
That one's pretty strange. Well, it kind of makes sense for what he's doing, but he actually gets it all wrong anyways. Yes, there's a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That's part of normal dialectics.
Mm-hmm.
But the Hegelian part, he doesn't mention at all. So I feel like one of the writers was just like, hey.
It's a very weirdly kind of written faction in terms of, they do have... It does seem like quite a fascist, authoritarian thing, and then he does just kind of spout all these ideals, which seem to kind of go against that, and I think bring a lot of people over to kind of the Legion's side.
Definitely, I know a lot of people who have been like, "Oh, I joined the Legion because I listened to Caesar speak."
He sounded Hegelian dialect.
He made sense.
He sounds quite smart, yeah.
And I think that's kind of like his thing. He's a guy who's very book smart.
Yeah.
But he doesn't actually really know what he's saying. He just kind of talks.
At the end of the game, you can tell what was his name? Legate Lanius, his kind of second in command.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to hold all of this territory. What's your actual plan here? And they haven't really thought about it. They just kind of want to keep going west and take the dam and whatever the NCR has.
Yeah.
So,
Caesar seems to have thought about it a bit. He knows that by conquering Vegas and the NCR, his legion will be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Just like how Rome changed after it conquered everything.
Yeah.
All of the Roman gods came from other gods and religions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the downsides, of course, of the Legion are the fact that you have no rights, basically. You're either a slave, a sex slave if you're a woman, maybe if you're lucky, a wife to a centurion.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a man, you're either a combat slave, where you fight as a legionnaire soldier, or you carry heavy shit.
Mm-hmm.
But people who seem to live in Legion territory are separate from legionnaires, which is something I found interesting. There's that trader you can find who lives in Arizona. He's at the fort. But I'm guessing they would have expanded on that more had they had more time to work on the Legion.
Yeah, that's the thing. Their whole idea of just assimilating cultures is just it's, in terms of slavery, that's the biggest moral evil. I think you can point at the Legion and be like, yeah, no, obviously that's just completely wrong.
Yeah.
No matter how how they'll argue about Hegelian dialectics. Like at the end of the day, they are just kind of assimilating cultures and taking slaves, which to be fair, in the post-apocalypse is probably a lot more reasonable, but it's still not a moral good.
Well, I don't know, because I consider Fallout New Vegas to be a post-apocalypse. Where
That's a very good point. Yeah,
there are already other cultures and civilizations that exist, and at that point, you're not needing to worry about eating because there's farms and settlements.
I mean, Vegas is the perfect example of like the city itself in the game is so like well prepared and kind of active and functional compared to, say, DC or Boston in the same universe.
That's because I think Bethesda don't really understand how Fallout works.
Very true.
But speaking of Vegas, well, now I'm going to talk about Mr. House, my favorite guy. He's an autocrat, as he calls it that himself. When you talk to him about his philosophy and you say he's a dictator, he says he prefers the term autocrat. He believes in a capitalistic libertarian society where he is the leader, but he doesn't give a single shit about what you're doing. He just, like, so long as you're not breaking the law, he doesn't care.
Yeah, no, which I think is very much in the spirit of Vegas. It's kind of, he seems to love Vegas. He lives in the top of the big tower.
Oh yeah.
And he just kind of seems like, just get on with whatever you want. Let me get on with whatever I want.
And he seems to have the most lofty ideals out of everyone. He wants to progress technology and modernize to the point where he can get people to space. And
unlike the NCR and the Legion, he has a proven history. Like he stops the bombs from hitting Vegas.
He was an old world capitalist
badly,
in charge of Robco. He was a big guy.
Yeah, so he's got a kind of, you can point to his history and be like, yeah, no, okay, fair enough. He actually might have a chance of doing something quite, good for the future here. Especially, like you said, in terms of space.
Yeah.
Like, he managed to knock nukes out of the sky. I'm sure he could probably do something pretty cool with space.
Yeah, his lofty ideals are pretty good to think about. And the fact that he wants to move on from Earth shows that he's not clinging so much, I think, to the old world in terms of culture. Like, yeah, Vegas is a glitz and glamour, like, oh, you get to experience what life was like before the bombs in Vegas. But that's more of like an attraction to generate funds.
Exactly. Yeah, no,
he
is very, very capitalist. Like, he wants to make Vegas the kind of money machine.
I mean, you don't have to pay taxes if you live in NCR. I mean, you have to pay taxes in NCR. If you live in Mr. House's territory, I don't think he believes in taxes.
No, that's true. But you do have to, if I'm remembering right, I think you have to pay money to go into the Strip.
You don't actually. You just need to have a certain amount of money.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it's a credit check to make sure.
Fair enough.
And I think if there was, like, if he has his ending, and he develops Freeside, which he does do in the ending.
Yeah.
I imagine the credit check will get rid of. It's just because Freeside's a shithole.
Yeah, no, yeah, he doesn't want to let all the kind of muggers and
junkies.
Yeah, freaks in. Yeah, no, fair enough.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest thing with House is that he is a autocrat. He's he's not an authoritarian, which is good. That's different than Caesar. But he still is a single leader, which poses the very interesting philosophical and ideological question of, can you have a free society where everyone is free to do what they want, and if it's not a democracy? And a lot of libertarian circles do actually believe in that, whereas a lot of other circles will say, no, we need to have voting. But an interesting idea is that voting itself is a form of harm because you're forcing your political opinion onto other people.
It's very true.
Free rights.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I believe House would probably believe that.
I think with Mr. House, you run into the problem of, because you find out he's actually this, really old kind of man from before the war, and he's in the kind of cryostasis thing, which I'm sure sounds completely nuts, but still.
Yeah.
You find out he's this old man who's lived, like hundreds of years. Who's to say when that's going to end as well? He could be, if you put him in power, when does he come out of power, really? Because he doesn't seem to he's not a bad choice, it would seem, But that could change at any moment, and it seems like he wouldn't be gone for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, likelihood is he probably will stay in power for as long as he can.
Mm-hmm.
If you let him out of his little chamber and let him back in, you decide against it, he'll die in a year anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So it all depends on what the player does, really. Now, we're running out of time, so we're going to discuss have a small debate about which faction is the best. Now, I've already said Mr. House is my favourite, and you like the NCR, so
I do like the NCR.
Pose to me why the NCR is better.
Because despite the kind of dependency on the old world values, they do, I think, morally have the kind of high ground to stand on there, in terms of they genuinely want to try, or at least the good ones genuinely want to try and make the world a better place, or at the very least like it was before everything kind of got nuked, which was, that would be nice, I think. Whereas Mr. House, I understand the argument. I think in terms of Vegas specifically, he probably knows what he's doing a bit more. But in the Legion, I don't understand really when people say, "Oh yeah, the Legion's the best one." I think they're quite obviously the evil choice.
So, I mean, it's a bit of a shame because honestly, if it got more depth, maybe the people who would justify the Legion would have more ground.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Exactly. I think it's probably just a development time thing.
Yeah, House kind of has the same thing where he's got more of an established idea, but you don't really get to see much of it, which is a shame. But honestly, I think both the NCR and House, they have their benefits, they have their goods. I think an independent Vegas is a too lofty an idea. I think Vegas needs Mr. House-led Vegas is basically an independent Vegas anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I think Mr. House is just the independent Vegas without all the anarchy, and that's probably better off. But in the end, I'd say House is probably better just for the fact that you don't have to pay taxes. I hate taxes.
Hate taxes.
So, No. But anyway, that's all we have time for in total. Thank you for listening to another episode of Alignment Lock. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you for having me.
Next time, we'll be discussing the factions in the Stalker series, and I'll be getting some Slavic friends to help me with that. So, see you around.
Nice.